Hi, my name is Siby Phillips, and I've been a teacher for, I want to say, about 14 years now, and I've been an advisor for all 14 of those years. And I've taught in 3 different schools that have all had advisory programs. So I've had some experience with advisory, and some of that experience is super positive, and some of that experience is a little less positive. But I'll start with the positive. What I really like about advisory and what has always made me seek out schools that have had advisories ever since I student taught at a school that had an advisory program, is that I think it's the way that I've always been able to develop closer relationships with students, and it's allowed me to then use those relationships to teach those students. I think teachers that I work with that don't have advisories often say that they feel less connected to students than teachers who've had advisory. And so I'd say the students that I have the closest relationships with are always students in my advisory. And the students even that I keep in touch with are often the kids that I had advisory with. Mostly because I think that it's a place that allows you to talk to kids about more than just content. I think teaching can often be such a busy, busy day. You have kids coming into your class for maybe 45 minutes, maybe an hour, and there's a lot you're trying to do in that time with them. So when you have advisory, I often feel like it's a time when it's a little bit slower, and you do get to maybe notice things about students that you don't sometimes notice in the craziness of a period. So that, I think, is the biggest benefit, because I do think having those relationships helps you connect to the students, and when you're not connected to students, I think there's a huge difference in how you feel as a teacher and how the students view you as a teacher. The negatives from my personal experience have mostly just been that sometimes when you do have an advisory, it can be too much time sometimes with students, the same students. Every time I've had an advisory, it's always been the same students I'm teaching. The previous school that I taught at, I taught double periods of English with all the 9th graders. And then I'd have advisory with a group of 9th graders. So that meant that some days that I saw those kids 3 times a day. It's a lot to see each other. So there's that aspect of it sometimes. That said, when I've had students in my advisory that I haven't taught in my English class, I've sometimes struggled with that, not knowing them academically and only knowing them personally. So I do think that it is good to have them in class and advisory. But yeah, I think it can get really overwhelming sometimes. The other things about advisory. So starting out as a new teacher with advisory, I will say I also felt like, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do with these kids? If a school or a program doesn't have a strong sense of an advisory curriculum, you can really feel like you're babysitting students for that period. And at Leomark, the first school that I worked at, I felt like it took a while before we developed a strong curriculum, and so there were definitely times when I felt like I'm wasting time, and their time is being wasted a little bit. Currently at my school, advisory serves a lot of different purposes. We have independent reading happening in advisory twice a week. We have a health curriculum in the 10th grade advisory that happens in advisory. We have portfolios that happen once a year that's done through advisory. We have restorative circles once a week in advisory. So I almost feel like right now I have the opposite problem of advisory trying to do too many things and missing the component of really being able to do enough connecting with students and conferencing with students. we meet with students once a week to conference with them right now about their grades and things like that. And that to me has always been one of the largest components of advisory, is feeling like the extension of the guidance team is an advisor. So you are the person who cares about the students' grades, who's checking in with them, noticing trends maybe about what's happening with their homework, or especially with online grading systems. Like, that's been a huge benefit, I think, is helping students to stay on track as an advisor. But right now I feel totally overwhelmed by all of the things that my school does in advisory, and I would say that that's a problem. So I think there's like a balance that needs to happen in advisory that's hard to achieve. A need for curriculum, a need for different things that are definitely happening in routines in advisory, so that you're not just sitting there with students who are like using it as like a study hall, and then not really doing anything. But the flip side of that being like needing some time that's kind of flexible, so that you are actually able to conference with students, touch base with them about grades, and also about life and all of those things. Because obviously a big part of advisory is trying to develop a sense of community, connect with the student, but also connect students to each other. Again, my school right now has this restorative justice circle that we do once a week, which is an attempt to kind of have students discuss topics, ideas around like empathy, or discuss something current event-ish. But to do that in a way that helps students kind of listen to each other, talk to each other, and build relationships with maybe each other that they wouldn't otherwise, going beyond just kind of friend groups, but kind of learning how to collaborate and work with everyone. So that's like a nice component, but it's once a week right now, and I think that part could be developed more. I'm definitely pro advisory. That doesn't mean that every year I love it, or that every day I love it. It's often feels like a really hard part of the job, and you can dread like, what am I gonna face today, in an attempt to do those things. Like, kids don't necessarily want to be forced to build community. It is asking something more of them than just like doing their math homework or their English homework. So I think there's a lot to think about, and there's a lot that has to be in place for an advisory program to run well. And I think you also need people to buy in, because I think if teachers are not bought into the idea of what advisory is, then it doesn't run well. They can't sell it to students if they're not, they don't believe in what they're selling. So anyway, I hope that I gave you some things to think about. Thanks.